Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be scaping this UNS 5N and it will be the quickest aquascape you've ever seen, so stay tuned. So before I show you guys the hardscape, I'm going to pour in the soil first. This is a 3-liter bag of contrast soil. And it's in extra fine black. I'm not going to use the whole bag. I still have a little left. I'm gonna make a triangular slope to the back right here in this corner. And I'm using extra fine granule size because it's more proportional to a nano size tank. Also, the plant that I'm gonna plant is very small rooted, so it's gonna attach way easier than if I were to use a fine or normal granule. All right, I think that's enough soil for now. So are you guys ready to see the fastest hardscape? Done. So this is UNS Strata. It's part of a hardscape series that we have. And the interesting thing about this hardscape is that it's not actually real, but it's modeled after real stones. Strata is a line of hardscape that is resin made. So we're not picking rocks from the wild. This is actually based off of a Seirayu stone. It's not super lightweight like you think it would be, but if you look at the bottom, there are holes for air to escape. So the hardscape doesn't just float up. And this is a very beginner-friendly hardscape that any aquascaper can get their hands on. There's currently 2 types of strata. There's strata type 1 and type 2. We've already scaped with strata type 1 and type 2 together, and now we're going to be scaping with strata 2. So I'm going to wet the soil, and I'm only using 1 plant for this tank. And it's just going to be a simple foreground plant. So I've decided to create the fastest aquascape, but use one of the hardest plants in the hobby as the main plant. And I want to wet the soil really well, just because this plant is kind of difficult to plant if the soil setting is not really optimal for it. So like I mentioned earlier, I'll be using one of the hardest plants in the hobby. It's Utricularia graminifolia, otherwise known as UG. I think most people would agree with me when they say this plant is super cool looking. It's really fluffy. This comes in a tissue culture cup usually. And just because it looks very fluffy, don't be fooled by its appearance. It's actually very difficult to grow just because it prefers very stable planted aquarium environments. but we're gonna plant it anyways today, and I'll show you how I would go about keeping this plant healthy throughout the whole life cycle of a planted tank. Now I'm gonna take this portion of tissue culture and just rinse out the gel. And unlike other tissue culture plants, it doesn't really have your standard or typical root system. It tends to kind of just grow its blades of grass into the soil, and that's how it holds on. So we're gonna have to plant it pretty securely from the start. And it's also what makes it harder to plant, because once you wash the gel off, you don't know what's up or bottom of the plant, what's top or bottom, basically. Now I'll go ahead and pluck off a portion. And I'm planting the greenest side top down, basically. And I'm going to be planting pretty generously around this tank, just to make it look fuller from the start. And I'm planting it pretty close to each other, every little portion. I'm separating it into like 1/2-inch portions, and I'm planting it about 1/2 inch apart from each other. And you just keep going until the whole tank is full, at least in my case. And I like this plant because it gets really thick, so it looks like a miniature lawn underwater. And what makes this the quickest aquascape is not only just because I was using a pre-made hardscape, I'm also only planting one plant. And UG is not too hard to plant if you're using the right tools. So I'm using straight tweezers, and I'm just going directly in. And I'm making sure to plant the UG somewhat deep, because like I said, it doesn't have your typical root system, so it has a tendency of floating away from the soil when it gets too thick, or even when you start flooding if the plant isn't planted deep enough. So once again, I'm not planting close to the glass itself. I'm giving myself a little bit of space in between the glass and the first row of plants. Okay, so I'm still using my first portion of UG. That's why I love tissue cultures. It's because you can get so much out of one plant or one cup. Straight tweezers lets you get into places where it's harder to reach also. Let's see if I can get this. There you go. Now I'm on to the second row, right behind the first row. So here's an interesting fact about UG. It's actually a carnivorous plant, and if you're familiar with carnivorous plants, they receive their source of nutrients not mainly from their roots, but they also try to capture little critters such as fruit flies or whatever might be in their surrounding environment. But I guess that's the appeal of this aquatic plant being also a carnivorous plant. So while I'm planting, let me just give you some information about strata and why I think it's such a unique concept. As I explained earlier, it's made from highly durable resin, and because of that, it doesn't change the water chemistry. So this could potentially be a nano shrimp tank, and there will be no shift in the water parameters because of your hardscape. Driftwood changes the water parameters in a planted aquarium. Rocks also potentially can change depending on what type of rocks you use. It could change the water parameters. And that's what makes strata great too, because you don't have to worry about that. That's one less thing for you to worry about. And you can concentrate on growing and maintaining your planted aquarium rather than having to worry about an extra factor such as water parameters. So we're about halfway done with planting the tank. And for this 5N size, just for the front alone, I used about 2.5 cups of tissue culture. And I think I'm gonna wrap it up with around 5 cups. You don't need to use this many cups, but it's always great to start a planted aquarium with more than enough plants rather than not enough plants. And that's because aquatic plants actually help to stabilize an aquarium by taking up a lot of excess nutrients that might come from the soil or the water you're using. Basically, the more plants you use, the easier start your aquarium will have. So while you're watching this, you might be wondering why you want to use unnatural hardscape in your aquarium. Why not use the real thing? That's a valid thought. And to be honest, I thought the same thing. But after I filled the tank, it looked exactly the same. Trust me, I couldn't tell the difference myself. So we're finally finished planting this 5N, and I used a total of 5 cups of UG, and now typically it's time to fill the aquarium, but for this plant I found it easier to actually dry start it. Now you might be asking, what's dry starting? Well, as the name implies, dry starting is growing aquarium plants or aquatic plants in a kind of humid environment, and to create that we're gonna wrap some clear cling wrap around the tank, let the plant develop for a few weeks, even up to a month or 2, and then fill the aquarium. That way the plant is going to be a lot more mature. So what I'm gonna do now is just wrap the top cover, not very tightly, just loose, with some cling wrap. Now here's where a lot of people kind of deviate a little bit. We're in Southern California, so the weather is kind of hotter here. And what I like to do is leave a loose gap for air exchange, just so it doesn't get too humid. If it gets too humid in here, the plants will, sure, they'll grow, but also mold will grow. So what you want to do is leave a little gap. And I'm not gonna spray the plants down too often. Some people spray every day, twice a day. We'll maybe end up spraying it once a week, just because there's already a lot of water in here already. And yeah, we're pretty much good to go with this tank. We'll just let it grow out for a few weeks and we'll keep you guys updated. So stay tuned.